Awesome. Well, welcome to everyone, and especially my New Hampshire peeps that I see on there. I'd like to introduce Pastor Logan Loveday. He is the church revitalization catalyst for Baptist churches in New England and also serves as lead pastor at First Baptist Marlboro. And so we've been serving together here in New England for a while now. So welcome, Logan.
Thanks, Rich. Looking forward to tonight. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So as we think about AI, there's a million different directions we could go. The ethical ramifications, ways it can be helpful or not helpful. Um, what are some kind of helpful things that Chat AI or Chat GPT in particular can help with? It's
Sure.
kind
So,
of
as a bivocational pastor, well, really trivocational, I've served as a marketplace chaplain, now working with the BCNE, but then also pastor at First Baptist in Marlboro. Um, as a parent with three kids, 11, 9, and 6, I know that common phrase oh so well that there's too much to do and not enough time or staff. We've talked about this in church planning and church revitalization. There's just a lot of hats that pastors wear, especially in New England. Even if sometimes they're full-time pastors with maybe one staff, there's a lot of advantages to using AI and ChatGPT. Obviously, there's some guardrails we need to have with that, but it does start with a mindset that AI is a tool, not a threat. It helps us serve God and people more effectively. And I've really found that to be true. I think this quote is really, really important as we think about the relational aspect of ministry and then how we can use AI as a tool. Is that AI can't replace a pastor's heart, but it can free up our hands. There's a lot of things that hinder us from connecting with people and doing relational ministry that still need to be done, whether it's logistics, whether it's financial, some of that extra stuff that are required of us, administrative, organization. Some of us aren't that strong, but at these things, but AI can come in and really can help us, whether we're bivocational, full time, whatever it may be. We can be a preacher in one moment, doing admin, communicator, strategist, budget, finance officer, a lot of different roles. But ChatGPT can act as a free digital assistant, and that's how I've experienced it. Doing some research, Lifeway published some things about the same time that I was wanting to do this and talk to Sandy about it. And it said some of the similar things that I've experienced and we've experienced at our church, like content creation, administrative tasks, brainstorming, planning, and doing some delegation without staff. And it's really, for me, freed up a lot of time to connect with people, to reach people, to keep that discipleship mission the main thing, all while improving my administrative organization skills, communication skills, those types of things. So it's a mindset that we got to start with.
Yeah. Yeah. So when was like the first time you realized AI could be helpful for you in ministry?
So I first started using it with my sermon because I have a tendency to be very wordy when I write, and I kind of wanted something to edit me every week. My script, I do an expanded manuscript, and so I wanted something that would edit my manuscript that would help me summarize and not be so wordy. It's one of my biggest weaknesses in writing. There's so much to say, and we actually began translating our services now live into Portuguese. And I've found that I had to not necessarily cut out, but I had to refine and clarify things that I was saying because it was just really wordy. And so I began running my sermon outline, the full manuscript really, through ChatGPT and watching it carefully, asking the right questions and saying, I just want this section edited. I just want this with more clarity or format this a little bit better. So that was kind of my introduction to it. And it made a difference that week, both for my live translation, for my Portuguese speakers, but then even for those who English weren't their first language, my French speakers, my Haitians, some of our other members in our congregation, but then also just my congregation as a whole. They quickly began to say, "Hey, like we're having bits that we can really digest here that maybe in the past took too long to say." or I wasn't as an effective as a communicator to try to get that point across.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what was the mind shift change that you had to make from these lengthy manuscripts to trusting in some ways this tool to help you edit in other aspects of ministry?
So I didn't know at first how much that I could do with this. I'm a millennial. I'm a little more old school, a little bit like my parents, so much that I'm a little bit of a hesitant starter on some technology things. I just, I much rather be in the moment and kind of want to be with people. You know, I'm not usually snapping photos or anything like that. Also because you'd see my father-in-law Terry post the same photo, so what's the point? But I just kind of was a little bit slower to the game on some of that, some of the smartphone technology things like that. But then I began to realize that, man, this is really helping me think more strategically. It's freeing up my time for more people, for family. It's freeing up ministry to be more intentional and focused. And once I realized that, the organization and administrative brain side of me was like, ooh, yes, this is nice. So it was a easier mindset for me once I began playing with it and seeing what I could do, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So you mentioned sermon editing. We got a slide there. What are some other things that you found AI to be helpful with in a ministry setting?
Yeah, so I use it kind of in four main ways, and we'll talk about a few other options that I've found some people have suggested. But I definitely use it for my sermon prep and writing, whether it's brainstorming titles and serious ideas, to get more creative with the way I maybe would say a point or come up with a series idea. It helped me think through my outlining my messages with my key points. I will say that if you've done the work, the hermeneutical work of having proper exegesis, and you've written that out, and you play with ChatGPT or other things like that, it will really help in those intros, those conclusions, making things sound clearer like a personal editor would in writing a book. I also think it's very valuable when you're thinking about illustrations and applications. Those things weren't really taught to us very much in seminary and a lot of preaching things. Sometimes our preaching stuff can be highly academic, but then lack that homiletical point where how do I communicate that? How do I give a practical, a very real example of how we can be doers of the word, not just hearers? And then the illustrations it comes up with. Sometimes the jokes and illustrations are cheesy. They're like bad dad jokes. But then there are other times when, man, that was a really good illustration that it came up with, and it really tied in well with my point, maybe better than I could find or come up with. So those are some good pieces. I definitely have helped when translating things because we are doing more and more of that, not just for communication, but on our online content. And so it's really nice as well. Any church communication, it's been a huge help writing professional emails, editing blogs and article content, writing invitations or creating workflows like for a ministry event. Some of us are just not very skilled administratively or not very organized. We care about people, we care about the Bible, and we want them to grow in faith, but we still need to find some strengths if there aren't other people on our team for administrative and kind of church communication stuff. So I think it helps in improving our tone. I've read quite a bit about how we engage with like first time guests and do follow up. And a lot of times our follow up and first time guest stuff is just like, it sounds so generic that ChatGPT and other things like other AI tools like that can help us improve so that it's more engaging because we really do care about people. And I think that's a great tool to have. Creative support. Now, I will say that Chat GPT, in my personal opinion, is not the best for designing title slides, sermon graphics, social media posts, generating AI images. Um, it it works through Canva, which our team already uses for a lot of our social media posts, but I don't think the integrations meshed well. There's some other platforms and AI tools that work better for kind of coming up with promotional material or content like that. I'll say we do, like if I'm putting my sermon in, I'll ask it to create me a title slide for my series. I'll have it create title slides for each one of my sermons, YouTube thumbnails. That stuff's really important. My wife has her own YouTube channel, and so YouTube thumbnails are very important when you're trying to play with that YouTube algorithm. And so I'll have it do that. Sometimes I'll have it do some quotes from my sermons, and we can use those for a social media team. And so it makes a volunteer's job really easy, especially when they have families, and a lot of times they're not getting paid to do some of this creative things in our church for us. So it is ChatGPT's okay, but again, there are some other ones. I think we'll talk about them at the end too that are a little bit better as far as the media stuff. And the other way that I've found has been really, really helpful is the strategic planning. Whether it's organizing ministry structures like your elders, your teams, your discipleship processes, your follow-up processes, it's great to do task planning and use an administrative tool. It does create PDFs and PowerPoints for you if you want them. It'll help you come up with an outreach follow-up guide. I'll give you an example. I'm working with a young adult who is from a different country, and he wants to lead some of our young adult ministry at our church. And so I realized the other day, I don't know when this happened to me, Rich, but I'm no longer in the young adult category. So I said, well, I guess I need to do a little bit of research on this. And so he and I did a little bit of research about how to start a young adult ministry and kind of created a 1.5 page strategy of how we do that. And when we got done looking at it and working with ChatGPT, he's like, oh man, this is like exactly what we did in my college student ministry. Uh, I feel so empowered and equipped now that I can definitely do this having this right here. And so we've done the same thing with our media team when we've said, okay, create us a media strategy. And you have to ask specific and you have to ask good questions. We learned that in high school. At least I remember learning that in high school when you did any research. And so the same thing's true of any of the AI tools. Um, you want to stay away from kind of the generic, although that can be helpful. But if you ask really good, specific questions with your context, it'll put out some really good strategies that you can obviously edit, change, improve, and make shifts to with your team.
Yeah, so one of the questions popped up. What have been some of the weaknesses? You mentioned some of that graphic design stuff. What other, you're like, man, I can't believe this happened.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there are two things that I've noticed. One is it does have to learn you, and I actually signed up and kind of begin to say, "Hey, learn this." I've created projects on there so it can pull past information or the way I write in there. When I first started using it, it was very, I could tell it just gave me all churchy words and lingo, and like even would put in folks. And I don't use the word folks like at all. And at one point I said, don't ever use this ever when I'm writing again.
Yeah.
Um, and anything predictive. So this is the nice thing about ChatGPT. It's not like a deep learning, producing answers for you. It's mostly pulling data, past information, and putting it together, organizing things for you. And so anything predictive, it won't do. Like I've asked it some questions about some events that are going to happen this year, and like you have to be really specific or tell it, hey, this event is happening later this year. Otherwise, it won't include anything that hasn't happened yet. And so I thought that's kind of a its own safeguard. I will say it won't do anything with kids' photos. So that's one thing. They have some of their own built-in safeguards, like you can't edit kids' photos. It won't even allow you to use them for like any promotional marketing things. I don't know if that's true for all of the AI things, but I know ChatGPT in particular has some of its own built-in safeguards like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's one creative thing you didn't expect AI to be able to help you with?
So one thing that we've just started using was any complementary material. So I never thought about this, but using ChatGPT for us has we've used it to create like our own devotionals and our own weekly Bible studies for our groups and our members, prayer guides and things like that, based upon the sermon series that we're doing. So we've been able to actually take and move even more beyond the Sunday or the large gathering experiences to get things into people's hands regularly or help them to have conversations regularly. I've had some use it to create role playing dialogues of how to share the gospel and then go out and use that. And so it's helping people every day, again, be doers of the word instead of just hearers. They take it and they just kind of just nothing really happens with it or only affects them a little bit, but to be able to use it throughout the rest of the week for various things. I didn't even think about that in the beginning. That was some stuff that I learned how to do from others. You take a sermon series and you say, turn this into a devotional or an expanded devotional, and you can edit that obviously and work with your team on that. Some of our leadership has been doing that to create, we're doing right now one on the church, and we're moving to an elder structure in our church. And so there'll be some helpful things and some guides that it will create for us that we can use based upon our current sermon series and some extra things that we want to do. So there's been some extra pieces like that that have been really helpful.
Cool, cool. So as we think of other ways to use these AI tools, what are some under the radar ways to save time? Like, because I mean, that's really what it's about, being more productive, better serving the kingdom, and I think of saving time. You mentioned also spending time with kids, spend time with family, spend time doing other things, but also saving time to have greater kingdom impact. That some of these things that just are involved in the American church, as far as the visual and the media stuff, that uh, uh, we could do other kingdom work if we allow AI to help us with some of these other things.
For sure. Yeah, the reality is AI can't and won't replace relational ministry. We know that. It's not here to lead small groups or to pray over students at camp. But what it can do is help streamline tasks. It can help us create that margin and free us up to do the work only we can do, which is walking alongside others in faith. We know that. So if I have to be honest with myself, I'm not a young adult anymore. I can't on my own come up with a young adult strategy. I know what needs to happen relationally in Bible studies, but in a practical sense, how do I multiply that with another leader, a guy that I'm coaching or a guy that I'm mentoring? How do I make sure, different ministry levels have the tools they need, have the strategies they need? I'm not the best at all. As a matter of fact, I try to stay away from it, from anything media content related. That's just not my thing. I hate doing videos of myself. So, like these webinars are enough as it is. Sandy, this is what you got. Um, you know, and so being able to say and honestly say, I'm not strong in these certain areas. If I don't have someone on my team who is, or they're not willing to lead, or I need that help, or I don't have paid staff, man, these tools can really come on board almost in a way as staff for us, as assistants to help in our weaknesses. So we're not spending so much time working on things that really, at the end of the day, probably doesn't turn out to be that good, anyways. I've seen some content produced by some pastors before, whether it's their sermon, Bible studies, some media, some graphics, and they tell me how much time they spent into it. And I'm like, ooh, well, it's pretty rough. Um, Whereas you can use these tools and often use them with your team to really be able to go from good to great, whether it's communicating, whether it's organization, whether it's administrative stuff. I think there's some real value to helping us be better ministers with these tools instead of seeing them as something that maybe we're afraid of or a little bit skeptical about. Again, you're not asking AI to pastor your church. You're asking AI to assist you, just like any other assistant would. And you can cut that off wherever you want to. You can put limits and safeguards up wherever you want to. But there are some pretty cool ways. I think there's some other things that others are doing that I haven't experimented with, such as creating some Bible study generators. It's great for small group discussion questions from what I hear, devotional outlines. I know of some that are using it for like church operations. If you're looking, you got a small church or a big church, whatever size, and you're looking to do some volunteer scheduling help, drafting and editing policy documents, it's good for that kind of stuff. I know that can be pretty costly as a church planner, working through some of those initial things. Budgeting or building project planning templates. I've known a few to do some grant writing. Most of us, probably in seminary as pastors or leaders, never took grant writing sources, and we've got to figure out some other sources of income as we kind of diversify, whether it's Google ad grant help, website content improvement. I've known some to use it for improving how their websites are found online, writing some biographical sketches about their church for some promotional documents. So those are some ways that I've heard others using it and seen some research. I haven't gotten to a lot of that yet. We have used it recently for our endowment fund at our church that we just started. And it created also some documents for us to give out when we did our history room grand opening. And I will say there was 4 or 5 people that spoke to us that day and have already started giving towards our endowment. And it took us maybe an hour, couple to put together the endowment and documents using ChatGPT. So that's pretty helpful when you think about that from some of the stuff that maybe we're not as experienced in.
Yeah, yeah. So as we think about all the things it can do, shift a little bit to the ethical side of AI. I mean, most of the comments here are people that are actively using ChatGPT and other things to use for ministry. You got one question, we'll get to yours, Robbie, in a minute. But here in New Hampshire, I mean, we have folks that build Faraday cages in their house, and the idea of using AI is scary to them. What word maybe of encouragement or warning would you have to those that either slow adopters to technology, have some maybe some very real fears of using AI? Um,
Sure. I mean, I'm right there with you. Like I said, I didn't start using it until maybe the end of last year, really the beginning of this year. And ChatGPT at least has been around for quite a few years now. I knew my brother-in-law was using it for work, and I saw some different things he did, but I just never got into it. Um, I would say that caution of any kind with this is responsible. It's healthy. I mean, it's the same thing when you're communicating and you're preaching, when you're looking at commentaries and things, you want to make sure that you're vetting those. And so I would say any type of vetting you have is helpful. Now, I know that we could do all kinds of arguments about why we shouldn't use tools or such in the church. And I'm going to be honest with you. I've been to Athens, Greece. I've been to Corinth. And if we could just stand up in the field with no lights and audio and any of that stuff and just teach like Jesus, let's do it. Praise God. But the reality is, there are some things that are different in our context. There are also some advantages. I mean, I believe the Apostle Paul would use articles and email and TVs to communicate the message of the gospel, just like we saw him use all the means in his day to make sure that everyone heard. So I think we do have to wrestle a little bit with that mindset. I think it's a prayer, but I do believe we have to think and pray and understand that AI can be a tool if we steward it well, just like all the other tools we use. Our church buildings, our vehicles, our websites. It doesn't replace the Spirit's work. We should put up some guardrails, fact checking the content, the scripture references, um, use it to clarify and accelerate, but not bypass your prayer and study. If you're pulling all your sermons from there, there's a heart problem, right? For us as a leader, for us as a pastor, maybe there's a overworking nature going there, a dependence that's there. I think as a church, you should be transparent about it. I've already, when I first got into it, I began telling my church leaders and team members, guys, this would be a great tool for you to use here in X. I knew there were some volunteers that maybe for the lack of time, skill set, know-how, experience, didn't know how to do certain things, and I helped them work through some of those simple problems by showing them how to work this tool. And together, we have some of our own accountability as a group. And so I think it's important that as a church, you kind of create some guardrails, maybe not so formal, but you admittedly say, hey, let's investigate this tool. For example, we're going to start with one called Sermon Shots, where it'll take our sermons, my live messages, and any of our elders or leaders preach, and it will pull out different quotes, videos, posts, and for social media that really we've looked at the time that it takes, and it's quite a long time. We don't have a big budget. We don't have a staff. All of our ministry, for the most part, is done with volunteers. And so a tool like this would be able to give them that in between of that time and those tools to figure out, hey, how can we use this to make sure that the gospel goes the furthest, but also recognize that, well, they're unpaid staff, or maybe the time doesn't allow for them to take a whole hour's worth of a service and cut and snip and paste and save and copy and do all this and that. And so, uh, again, we're going to monitor that. We haven't used it yet, but we're going to monitor that to make sure it's pulling out what we think would be best and not just putting up things that would confuse people or communicate something that we're not trying to say. So there's always a vetting part to any of these tools. And I think that's the process that keeps us in the safe, kind of safe lane.
Yeah. Yeah. So think about that. You think of fear being one objection. The other one, almost that using ChatGPT is cheating. I remember been in ministry long enough when Logos came out with their language tools, and you could just scroll over a word and it parsed verbs and gave you definitions and I mean, it was its own concordance right there. And there was some objection to that. Like it was almost cheating. Like if you didn't do every bit of the hard work, then you really weren't doing the work. Would you have anything to say about that? That think people think it's cheating if you use these tools?
Yeah, sure. I think King Solomon said it best, right? There's nothing new under the sun. He said, learn from my mistakes, learn from my experiences. In essence, every time we get up on the altar, platform, any stage to communicate the word of God, we're cheating because we're copying God's words. We could really press into that, but I think the reality is, again, I think you need to find the safe line between using it as a helpful tool and depending upon it. Now, there are some things that maybe I'm not skilled at that I can depend on. Maybe it helps me edit things better because maybe I am just too wordy, or maybe I wasn't that great in English class and I need some help with formatting some of my writing. I think ultimately we're using it as a tool to improve what the Holy Spirit is already doing, saying within our ministries. To think that we have all the ideas on our own that is going to pull off a church ministry or a church or a message, um, I, I think probably has some healthy arrogance to it. I think we need to be humble enough to say, maybe there are some areas in which I need help, whether it's another team member, whether we're a small church, large church, whatever size church we are, or whether it's a tool. I use Grammarly in my Word documents, and I think it's helpful. It learns how I write, but also at the same time, it helps just overall improve my grammar. I think it's just honest to say we're not perfect. And we can use these tools as aids, not crutches. Not being dependent upon them, but as assistance.
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking of tools, kind of getting back to Robbie's question, if you know how and why a tool works, you're able to use it more effective. So kind of where how does ChatGPT learn? How does AI learn? And how does it continue to learn?
Yeah, so this is pretty new for me because I was curious about that too, and I'm not sure that I still fully understand all of it. But there are different levels to AI. For example, ChatGPT functions more as an data organizer and presenter, a more of an administrative thing. It doesn't give you interpretive results beyond the information that's already there. And a lot of the information is just what's presented online from books. And, for the longest time, we've been using Google. And now AI, in my opinion, at least the ChatGPT and things like that, are just faster versions to sort through all the information. It's an improved Google, so to speak. But there are other AIs that do some more deep thinking. I was talking to Joe Souza about this the other day. There are some AIs that you can ask specifically to do some deep interpretation of data. There's a great webinar that I asked Sandy if she can send out maybe after this one of the differences in the webinars, how they learn, what kind of level they fall in, whether they're function like a human brain, so to speak, at least on a computer mainframe, or if it's just like a data organizer, a quicker formula of information. So that's important to keep in mind is that not all of them are the same. There are differences. Like I said, even the same thing with like media creation and content creation. ChatGPT is not strong at it, but like Meta, Facebook, when you want to create an AI image, I can make myself look like a Viking and a Jedi, and I think it looks pretty great. My wife doesn't, but I think it looks cool.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, those are fun to play around with. Um, yeah. So as you think through, I mean, we're pastors here, and so the question we always have to ask is now, what's next? So what would be some next steps maybe for some folks on the webinar, especially if they're new uh, to using AI like myself?
Yeah, I would kind of assess where you're at as a leader, maybe the ministry of your church. What do you think you could benefit from next? Is it you need help with social media and media content creation, website stuff? Do you, as a pastor, you think you want to improve? Like, is your focus point right now improving your communication skills? Do you want to learn how to write better applications or more specific ones? I would take kind of a personal inventory assessment, maybe even ask your team and say, hey, if we were to use a tool like this, where do you think we could focus and how do you think we could do that? And then I would also suggest just playing with it on your own. I think you get better acquainted with it. You learn how to ask the right questions when you begin kind of figuring it out. Before I used it for ministry, I probably used it for a couple months, just playing with it on its own before I got the feel, before I kind of signed up and said I want to, create different projects and categories and work this way before I asked it to really learn me. Um, I played with it for quite a while, so I think that's kind of like building that personal prompt library. If you have a task or something that you're wanting to plan, if you're starting a new ministry or a new event, maybe field test it. I'll put it in there and say, hey, we want to start building a social media ministry team for our rural church. Of so many people, our church is, traditional, but maybe has some contemporary elements. You kind of put in those contextual pieces and then see what comes out. You may hate it. You may edit some things. Your other leaders in your church as a whole may say, I really like this. Or they may say, this is really dumb. It doesn't make any sense for us. So I think that's something you could do pretty easily. Um, you know, I know that there are other pastors and leaders. I know that Lifeway has written quite a bit about this over the last couple of months, where you can kind of get in that AI community and see what others are doing and using it for. Again, some may be using it more extreme than you want to use it. Some people may have some ideas that you haven't done yet. But I say maybe try to feel it out. Uh, the reality is, many people are online. These tools aren't going away. And if they do, oh well, we still have the Bible. And we're going to keep on doing what we've always done. But in the meantime, I say let's make the most of it for the gospel. I love what Zach Workin wrote in this Lifeway article that AI tools free up time for discipleship and growth. And I think in a world, especially in our Western culture, that is so busy and they have so many hours filled up. Even for us, the demands on us as pastors, leaders at all kinds of different size churches, we've got to make sure that we're freeing them up as much time for people, for discipleship and growth as we possibly can. So maybe those are some next steps to consider, or maybe to tackle all of them.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I had a question here from Julie, and Josh helped start to answer it. So, completely new to AI, is there any advice for someone in kids ministry, kind of at specific context, um, that would be helpful?
Yeah, so I haven't used it a ton in kids ministry because we had spent quite a while focusing on that the last 3 years in our revitalization. But I have heard of others who have written up, emergency plans, fire escape plans, security plans for kids ministry, policies and procedures. And then you can obviously text or tweak those as much as you want for your kids ministry. I will say my father-in-law, this was pretty cool. I didn't do this, so I'm not going to take credit for it. My father-in-law took a picture of our church and put it in ChatGPT and asked it to make coloring sheets. And so I thought that was kind of cool. He did that for one special event. There's some, if you wanted to do some take home things for parents, a lot of the curriculum today has take home things to use with parents, but ChatGPT will create take home questions based upon your lessons that you're writing or the content that you're using. And so it can kind of expand what you are doing, helping you to reach more children, I think, and disciple more, and maybe even their parents as well. If you want, I've known some to say, hey, we want to reach kids and we want to reach the parents. Help me come up with a strategy to do that. And the great thing is it'll pull a lot of different ideas from other places. And if you ask the right questions, and when I say that, add your context. So, say you're a certain size church in a certain area, give some, if you're multi-ethnic, if you have different languages, and it'll do a really good job of kind of spitting out very practical steps for you.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that goes into um, Nick's question here. What would a personal prompt library look like?
Yeah, so over on the side, like for example, on ChatGPT on the side, I have different prompts. So I have like a sermon writing prompt or illustration prompt. I have some strategy writing or some grant writing things on the side. So I'll ask it some specific questions, say for the grant writing. We're having a history tour, our history room grand opening for our 155-year-old church. And I'll give some more specifics at length for our church context and say, help me to write grant letters or fundraising letters for all the businesses in my downtown. And so you can kind of put your specifics in and then have some questions that you want it to, some things that you want it to build like that. Or if you're just going to do your own kind of prompt library, you can ask anything. That's the wild thing about it is you can ask anything and tell it to learn you. I think that's really important. Um, and it'll begin to learn your question style, your writing style, because that's helpful later when you ask questions. It's not giving you just generic data that it pulled from the internet, but it'll give you more specific things that either you're asking or along the same lines of what you're working in. So.
Yeah, cool. So as we think through this, and you guys can put there in the chat as well, like one weekly task that drains your time that maybe AI could help with. How about
Yeah.
how about you, Logan? What was the one thing when you started using these tools that like was a game changer, or at least really made a significant difference?
Yeah, writing emails and text. I do a lot of follow up within our church, and our team does as well. But I can have a personal piece that I want to connect with everybody, all of our new visitors. But then also on the regular basis, I want to connect with our individual members, and I send both handwritten cards, I send emails, I send texts, I send Facebook messages, and so it helps me tailor those so that they're specific to each person, but that I can use them in different formats. Like I wouldn't, sometimes what we do is we'll write an email to someone and then we'll just copy that email and then we'll paste it in a text message. And it reads like an email. And whereas it should have a different tone and it should read a little bit different in those different formats. And so I think in communication, it's just made things better. So my biggest thing I think I use it for is that administrative editing of ideas that I have or things that I've written that maybe on a normal basis would take me a week to work through, can take me a whole lot less time. So that's one of my big things. Whether it's content that I'm creating for a Bible study, whether it's just that communication things like emails and text, it's been really helpful for me on that.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I mean, I think the first thing I'd probably do is sermon titles. I hate coming up with sermon titles. If my media team could get away with it, I would just number them all. But that's that's not good for the algorithm as you think about spreading reach and having a greater impact with the words God has given you. I think that would be my first request.
Yeah, those are pretty cool. I've played with that recently too, Rich. I think we actually cheat on that or copy more than we realize because we do a lot of times just use so much churchy language. And it's not that I don't want people to learn church language. I think you need to teach and explain more than ever now. But I also think that we're communicating sometimes and people don't have a clue what we're saying, even though we've been hearing it for a long time. And so sermon titles are great. You know, when we say sometimes, if you do a sermon titled Jesus as Savior and Lord and Redeemer, yes, all those are true. All that should be in your sermon, but maybe that's not the sermon title. And so I've done before, I've said, okay, this is the point I'm trying to make. Give me like 10 different title options. And then I'll kind of sort through them. Sometimes I'll blend them. I don't like what it gives me, or I think it tried to go away from my point or whatever. So titles, main points of the sermon, your individual points, main points of I'm not doing main points of my text because my text's already communicating for itself. But then how do I say that in a way that maybe is going to stick with people? How do I say that in a way that maybe they're going to understand? I remember in seminary, we were taught to cross that principalizing bridge and cross that contextualization to get to today, but we never really learned how to do that well. That was one of the steps in hermeneutics, but a lot of times we never learned how to move from their day, their words, into our day and our words, communicating the same point or defining it if we need to. So I think that's been really fun to look at because it's come up with some stuff that I would have never come up with because I'm not that creative.
Yeah. Yeah. So what word of encouragement would you have for someone that, I mean, any new tool requires a learning curve and there's an investment there. And I'm sure initially you're probably putting more time into it than what you're getting out of it. Um, how long does that process take? What's the hurdle look like?
No, it was really fast. I mean, it's incredible how fast, even the free version like ChatGPT, it's incredible how fast it puts out stuff. Every now and then it'll kind of flake out or it'll take a little bit longer to create an image or I might have to refresh it. But no, it's incredibly fast. I am way more efficient, way more productive for the kingdom when I use ChatGPT in these areas because it's just so much faster than I can type. It's so much faster sometimes than I can think. And so it is a really helpful assistant in that way. Again, I'm the safeguard because nothing gets past me as the individual. But there are some things that I need help thinking through, or maybe I'm just tired. I need to really maybe edit this one more time, or whatever it is, or I've got an idea, but I'm not really sure how I want to communicate it. It's much quicker, and I get out a whole lot more than the time it takes to do it. It's a reverse thing, and I think that's one of the perks. Is it is a time saver, and it helps us to steward our time really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a question that you can ask yourself for those watching, if you had an extra staff member, what would you delegate first? What would be that task that you'd hand off first? And is AI a possible solution to that? Because if you could hand it off to someone already, you probably would have done it. So what's that one thing you're holding on to that maybe this tool can help you free up into different ministry?
Yeah, I have two that we're working through now because it does take a little bit of integration between. But we send out a weekly newsletter kind of as like a bulletin through MailChimp. And then we also have our regular bulletin on Sunday mornings, or we call it a worship guide. And what's nice about the new integrations is if I just tell Chat GPT the events or things that are coming up, it'll just take what I've already formatted and done and import that with images and with the text, and then it gives me the opportunity to review it before it'll send it out. And so it saves me a lot of time rather than manually uploading photos, manually typing everything out, doing a new one every time, or making just those simple edits. It's a real time saver on that stuff because I don't have an administrative assistant. I don't have a secretary. And so a lot of times either I'm doing that work or some of the volunteers in the church are doing that work. And it's just been incredible to have this extra processing tool for myself or for our volunteers when we're doing those types of things.
Yeah. Yeah. So from a leadership perspective, as you started using these tools, I mean, anything that's new, you have early adopters, you have late adopters, and then you got some never adopters. And knowing a little bit of your congregation, you probably got all of those. How have you navigated using these tools in your personal ministry?
Yeah, so I don't require any of our team to use them. I simply have said, hey, this would be great if you're writing this or working on this, or if you've been struggling here, this would be great. I've got people who would never ever use them. I've still got some members who don't even have cell phones. I don't know how, and they live in this world, but that's just the reality. And so I'm not going to force anything on anyone. I like to present the tool. I think we're to encourage and equip. But at the end of the day, those people have to decide whether they want to use those tools or not. And they may not need to. Some people, they may be just really strong in a certain area, or they may be gifted in that area and already know how to do it, and they don't need to use it. But I think, like um, email, like text, like social media, I think they're tools that we can use in our tool belt. And if we need them, we pull them out as we need to. We haven't done any like group trainings on how to use it yet, but that's in part because we're working through our processes of how we develop people at our church, and that kind of that changing our structure from the start. But it's something that we've talked about that probably at every level, this will be something that we can encourage our directors, our leaders, our volunteers to use that will make them more efficient. And again, free them from the burdens of doing things they may not be extremely skilled at, but also, I mean, we recognize most people are working one, maybe even two jobs too. So, if you're talking about dual income families, kids are in school, they get home to see their family for a little while if they have activities, and then we're asking them to do all this extra content creation and things, and it's just, it can be demanding, whereas we can help them and give them tools that they can be more efficient in how they reach and connect with other people.
Cool. What are some of the cost expenses to use an AI in ministry?
Yeah, so ChatGPT itself is free. I know some of the other AI models are free at different base levels. I will say I actually don't know. It might be $20 a month for the fully unlocked version. I noticed that it's faster. It does memorize more intently and organize things more intently for us. I think the main reason why, at least I've experienced, why you pay for Chat GPT is any of the media creation stuff. Um, you probably only have so many free photos that it will make, or so many free like PowerPoints or slides that it'll make before you hit like your daily cap. Because it is working through Canva, and normally you have to pay for a good Canva subscription. But we have a budget for things like this, and so it was an expense that we set as a church that we're going to kind of use across the board. But I would tell you, if you're starting out, just run with it for the free stuff. I mean, I say in any of these platforms, if you're using Planning Center, any of that stuff, I say use all the free stuff until you need to change or until you've hit that ceiling. Nobody says that we have to make ministry really expensive. We just have to be really smart about it. And so there are a lot of free things that you can do with these in the same way that I'm talking about. I did all the free stuff before spending the money, and I'm telling you, most of the stuff that I've talked about tonight you can do on any of the free platforms. So that's helpful.
Yeah, so had one question. I was just getting ready for the webinar. I talked to one of my friends who's super creative. I'm not, and his concern was that using AI would be too far removed from the creative process. Almost that idea of cheating. And I think we're wired kind of the same. So maybe you might not have an answer for my creative friend. Um, but
Well,
how,
yeah, I would say if you have the friends, if you have the volunteers, if you have the team members who are gifted in those things, that's who you primarily want to use. I don't think that we use this as a substitute. I think we use this in an area where maybe we're weak and need a strength or an improvement. For example, we've got quite a few actually photographers on our social media team. Um, and they're really creative. However, as far as a strategy, about how to implement that. They're super creative, but they have no idea how to do a strategy of communicating things or the time to take full sermons and like take clips. That becomes challenging because they're really creative, and sometimes that creative stuff gets burned out because all the energy went into being really creative. That while they spent all the time doing that one creative thing, there was also all these other things that could have happened too. So I say work with the people and the giftings you have in your church. I would even ask before you start using ChatGPT, is there somebody more organized, more administrative? Can somebody edit? Can somebody create this creative content before you even begin using these tools? But if you don't have that, if you don't have the money to pay maybe a secretary, admin assistant in your starting point as a church plant, bivocational church, revitalizing church, whatever it is, then maybe you can use some of these pieces and these tools.
yeah, but yeah, we'll wrap up. I forgot we have trends in AI. If you want to just speak briefly about that.
Yeah, this makes me like I'm not an early adopter on this stuff, so some of the stuff makes me a little nervous. But as a father who now has a son with type 1 diabetes, there's some pretty cool stuff that they're using with AI to re-jumpstart my son's pancreas with a pill. And if that's possible in his lifetime, I think it's pretty awesome. I don't know how far it'll go. I know that we're probably all thinking that Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to show up on our doorstep. But we know that humans win every time. So for all you sci-fi buffs out there, we'll just keep pursuing through. And ultimately, we know that God is on the throne, irregardless of what happens. And so I trust Him as we move through this life, going to Him and His Word for my wisdom on this stuff.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. Yeah, the humans always win. And yeah, if we trust the Bible, I mean, God wins.
That's right.
There's no scheme of man that will thwart God's purposes, including AI. And so to use
Right.
these tools, a gift of common grace, as some would say, that knowledge is for kingdom work. Cool. Well, if there's no other questions, we will wrap up from here. Thank you guys. Thank you, Logan, for taking the time tonight. Thank you, Sandy, for always all the hard work you do behind the scene. Thank you, everyone in the chat. That's super helpful um, as well. So, Sandy, we'll wrap it up with you.
Well, we are glad you joined us today for our chat GPT. We hope it was helpful. And do me a favor, write in the chat, what's one thing that you got out of this session so that we'll know that it was beneficial. So write that in the chat before we close here tonight. And if you want to connect with Logan or Rich, you'll see their information on the screen. And perhaps we'll do a follow-up on Chat GPT or some of the other AI things as things go along. Because again, we want to do things that are important to the local church. And if you can think of other topics, put those in the chat too. And we will start thinking about doing those as well. But we do want to thank Rich and Logan for joining us tonight.